At least 80% of the people who attended said they would buy. All who indicated an interest were given 2 weeks to respond. At the end of the 2-week period, not one of the prospects had followed through. The investors set about to find out what in the world was wrong. What they discovered was that while the prospects had understood their proposal well enough to want to buy it, they had not understood it well enough to explain it satisfactorily to their accountants, lawyers, and spouses. The investors had achieved short-range success. Their presentation had been understood and warmly received, but they had failed to achieve long-range success. No one was acting on their proposal. They were not getting their desired response. To correct the problem, the investors insisted that in all future meetings, each prospect would be required to bring his or her spouse and at least one advisor. By explaining their complex proposal to all persons involved in the buying decision, they were then able to achieve long-range success as well. They used feedback to diagnose the problem, and they used that information to target the results in the future. Consistently obtaining both long and short-range success depends on 2 types of feedback: presentation feedback and message feedback. Presentation feedback tells us if our audience has heard and understood what we presented, and message feedback tells us if they have given the response we desired. The amount and nature of each kind of feedback will be determined by our goals for making a particular presentation. Performers, such as singers or dancers, comedians or entertainers, are usually more concerned with presentation feedback. They want to know how an audience reacts to a show. They are not necessarily aiming for a specific action from that audience beyond approval and applause. But on the other hand, if a person is trying to sell an idea or a plan or product, he or she is more concerned with the response the message produces. That person wants action from the audience. Now, sometimes the speaker isn't going to see any members of the audience again, so follow-up at a later date is the only way of knowing whether or not a message was heeded. In that case, we need to devise a method for obtaining feedback. There are some strategies, proven strategies, for getting useful feedback. Strategy number 1, test your presentation and message, not the audience. Effective communicators always assume the responsibility for getting results. It's a mark of an amateur to blame the audience for a failure, except of course in very rare instances. A teacher who gets angry with students because many of them do poorly on a test is more concerned with fixing the blame than fixing the problem. A skilled teacher knows that a test indicates a failure to stimulate enough interest in a subject, or a failure to present that subject effectively, or maybe even that the test itself was poor. Of course, the best test of your effectiveness as a communicator is how much of your presentation the audience understands and how close they come to the response you desire. That has more to do with your presentation and message than how good an audience was. Now, the next measure of your success as a communicator is the second strategy: test your effectiveness, not your abilities. Good feedback is not fishing for compliments. Asking people questions like, "Did you enjoy the presentation?" might produce glowing tributes, but it will not likely tell you anything truly useful. Specific questions that reveal what an audience understood you to say and how they related to what you said can be far more productive. It's never enough to be efficient in the presentation of our messages. We must be effective. So you don't need to find out how well everyone thinks you did. Rather, you have to know what your audience is going to do in response to your message. That, my friend, is effective communication. The third strategy for getting feedback is to listen, observe, and ask questions. Active listening and careful observation can often tell you more about how effective a presentation is than a more formal approach. When someone pays you a compliment, you can draw them out with questions to determine if what they understood is what you meant. It means